Hey guys, what's going on? Chris here doing another 4K Blu-ray review. Today I'm going to do it on Terminator Genisys, which just came out this past week for the first time on 4K Blu-ray, at least in the United States. Um, Pretty interesting film to review all around. As far as the video side of things go, um, another solid encode, another solid transfer from Paramount. At the very beginning of the film, though, when they first fade in and you see like the clouds and the skies and everything, there is some pretty noticeable banding. It's pretty strong, and then throughout the rest of the film, there's a couple other moments with some noticeable instances of banding. Not as bad as the start of the film, but still pretty noticeable. Where it kind of knocks the score down a notch or so, mainly because it's distracting, and you don't really get those sort of issues with say like Sony. Um, and Sony obviously being the studio that everybody's going to compare these transfers to, since they're the best studio on the format so far. However, with that being said, the majority of the transfer is still a really good looking disc. The film is shot digitally, I believe, on the Arri Alexa. I know the digital intermediate was at 2K. Visual effects were finished at 2K, but once again, that doesn't really matter as long as you have the pixel quality and you get a pretty solid transfer from the studio, which for the most part, other than the banding, you do get that with Terminator Genisys. Wide-angled shots, there's a pretty good amount of depth. You do get some very good foreground and background separation, especially during the climax when they're in that facility and they're setting up the sticky bombs and everything everywhere. Between like all the objects and the corridors and everything, there's just like a really good three-dimensional aspect to the imagery and everything, which is really solid. The high dynamic range is also really good. It's really natural, which I like. I'm a huge fan of when films and these transfers generally go for a more natural approach as opposed to a more stylistic approach. It just makes everything feel a little bit more authentic and natural. It just feels a little bit more believable, I guess. The wide color gamut is also really good. I really like the way that blues are utilized in this film. They're not too bold. They're not too overly vibrant, but they're still saturated enough to where there's just a little bit more panache to it compared to the standard Blu-ray. It's mostly a dark film, I think. I mean, you do get some daytime sequences, but just recollecting off the top of my head, there's a lot of nighttime sequences, a lot of interior, at least throughout the first half of the movie, where they're predominantly in darker locations, but there's still a very good amount of shadow detail. There's no black crush that I really saw being exhibited. There was still a very good amount of detail, and the black levels for the most part are very good too. There might be some minor instances where they're elevated slightly, but I think that's done more as a stylistic choice to kind of reveal more detail in specific shots, mainly in wide-angle shots when they're in that underground facility where they're have that trap set up to take out the original T-800 that came to 1984 to take out Sarah Connor or whatever. Audio side of things, the Atmos track is very good. I would say a very solid 4.5 out of 5. During the action sequences, there's a very good bass. There's very good low-end to high-end audio fidelity. There's very small nuances in the sound that you can kind of hear sprinkled throughout your room as the sound bounces around. Explosions and gunfire and everything is really visceral, really crisp, and really clean. So the audio side of things is also very good. To go back to the video transfer a little bit, other than the banding, yeah, it's really solid. And I would say the video score is probably a really solid 4 out of 5. Unfortunately, when the banding shows up in the instances that it does, it just takes away from the score a little bit, because it obviously takes you out of the experience a little bit when you see it. And it's definitely not something that's on the hardware side of things. It's just baked into the source, unfortunately. Other than that, though, I didn't really notice like any sort of pixelation or any blockiness to the image. I didn't notice any aberrations. I didn't notice any issues with the chroma channels and the way that was all processed and encoded. Skin tones look very good and natural. That's actually one of the things that I really like as far as the cinematography and color grading side of things goes. Is they went for a very naturalistic color style with this film, which is what I really like, because Alan Taylor, I think his previous film that he did before this was Thor: The Dark World, and most of the issues that I have with the Marvel films is that they just have this sort of sterilized, dead look to it, where they don't feel too cinematic or too visually interesting, I guess, for lack of a better word. But it felt like Alan Taylor was able to use a little bit more of a stylistic approach to this. It felt like the visuals were done a lot better than his previous work. Still nothing to the extent of like T1 or T2, because James Cameron is James Cameron. But I would definitely say that overall it's a very fine video presentation, and I would say pick it up if you're a collector, if you're a Terminator fan. I am. I love T1 and T2. Didn't care much for T3, and I really dislike T4. Genisys is okay, I guess. I mean, I don't understand the idea of making Terminator PG-13. I feel like that hurts it too, and I feel like similar to Rise of the Machines, they tried to give Arnold's character too much of a comedic element, and I just don't feel like that works. I get that they turned him into a good guy in the second film, and they had moments of deadpan humor, but he was still pretty menacing. You were still intimidated by the character itself, despite the fact that he was there to protect John in the second film. And so the last two iterations in which his character has been strongly featured, they've kind of just turned him into a joke, and I'm not really a fan of that. I get that he's older and everything, but you can still make him a certified badass. And I really hope with this sixth film coming up that, despite his age and whatever approach they decide to take with him, I just really hope that they give him a sense of legitimacy again. It's probably my biggest complaint with Genisys, other than the unneeded amount of exposition. They explain things way too much. It gets too dialogue heavy. And it's really unfortunate, because it feels almost insulting to the audience when they kind of have to spoon feed every answer to them, especially when they're repeating the same jokes, old but not obsolete. I mean, how many times do we need to hear that? We get that he's aging, and you have to explain to the audience why you still have him at like 70 years old running around shooting off shotguns and everything. No, because he's Arnold Schwarzenegger and he's the definitive Terminator. He's always going to occupy that role to some degree. And Emilia Clarke, I mean, she's okay, I guess. I'm not the biggest fan of her. I didn't really care much for her in Game of Thrones, and I haven't seen the new Star Wars, but she doesn't strike me as somebody that's really believable in the role of Sarah Connor, either in terms of vulnerability or when she, inevitably becomes, almost soldier-like and very independent and strong, and in the way that Linda Hamilton occupied that role. I mean, the transformation from her between films 1 and 2 was unbelievable, and the icon that she basically became through that role is still very prominent today. So I'm also looking forward to seeing her return in T6. So yeah, I mean, it's an okay film. It's better than Salvation, but is that really saying much? And compared to Rise of the Machines, I think a lot of other people would probably still prefer Genisys to Rise of the Machines, but I would still say that T3's still even a better film than Genisys. I mean, at least it was rated R. It had some really good action sequences, and in my opinion had one of the ballsiest endings for a blockbuster film within that 2000 to 2005 range. I mean, it was pretty dark, and I thought it was pretty awesome. So yeah, overall, as far as just the technical side of things go with the video and audio quality, it's pretty strong. I mean, if there wasn't any banding in the video transfer, you might actually be looking at a reference quality disc here, to be honest with you, because there's no other encoding anomalies that happen throughout. And like I said, I like the more natural approach to the HDR and wide color gamut. And the audio, like I said, the audio track is very good from start to finish, and you get a lot of balance between the action sequences and some of the more level and smooth out material, I guess, throughout the film. So yeah, I would say if you're a fan, pick it up. If you're not a fan and you're just a collector, obviously pick it up. If you're not a fan of the movie and you don't really have the budget to go out and just spend money on every 4K disc that comes out like I try to do, I guess you can say a pass until it at least drops in price. But just as far as a video and audio presentation is concerned, it's really solid. So yeah, that's really all I have to say about Terminator Genisys on 4K. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. See you later.